Hello, I'm Bill Bullard with R-CALF USA, the voice of the independent cattle producer in the United States of America. Well, R-CALF USA is now ready to present the final part of its four-part series explaining the first ever cattle industry long-range plan. And on Wednesday, January 13th, several board members will participate in a Facebook Live meeting to provide a wrap-up of the new plan. And it's not by accident that the new plan coincides with the start of a new Congress and a new administration. Now, the cattle plan represents a major departure from the previously combined cattle industry and beef industry plans, which have been called simply the beef industry plans, and which are focused more on beef and beef packers. In contrast, the new cattle industry plan issued by the board of R-CALF USA focuses more on U.S. cattle and on U.S. cattle producers. So this raises an important question. Are there examples of other industries where the interests of the supply chain are different than the interests of the downstream industry? Well, the relationship between the domestic steel supply chain and the downstream auto industry is one such example. Like the U.S. cattle industry, for decades the U.S. steel industry was convinced by the auto industry that if they helped support trade policies that would expand export markets and grow automobile demand, then the U.S. steel industry would share in the auto industry's increased profits. But that didn't happen. Instead, the U.S. steel industry began to realize that by supporting the interests of the auto industry, they were actually empowering the auto industry to lower the price of their superior U.S. produced steel to the same price the auto industry could purchase lesser quality steel from foreign sources. As a result, the U.S. steel industry began shrinking rapidly due to the lack of profitability. Now, recently, the steel industry broke ranks with its downstream partners and asked the United States to impose a 25% tariff on the cheaper imported steel to end the price disparity that was driving the domestic steel industry out of business. Unfortunately, they did so before it was too late. And today, the domestic steel industry is expanding. So the cattle industry needs to learn from this example. Like the steel industry, it too has been promoting the beef industry's interests in hopes of becoming prosperous. But like the steel industry did before it decided to stand on its own feet, the cattle industry is rapidly contracting and is not receiving its share of the beef industry profits. And this is why the cattle industry long-range plan is so important. It focuses on the other end of the food supply chain by focusing on the very foundations of the U.S. cattle industry. And that foundation, of course, consists of U.S. cattle and U.S. cattle producers. So unlike the beef industry's plan, the cattle industry's plan calls for 1. Growth in domestic and export demand for beef that is specifically produced from USA born and raised cattle. 2. Improved cattle sector profitability, specifically for U.S. cattle farmers and ranchers. 3. It calls for intensified efforts to preserve and protect the liberties and freedoms of independent U.S. cattle producers. And 4, it calls for elevating the cattle industry's role in assuring U.S. consumers of an uninterrupted supply of U.S. produced beef. Now, these objectives represent a monumental departure from the beef industry's plan, and it signifies that the cattle industry is an industry in its own right with distinct economic interests. Importantly, it also signifies that the cattle industry is forward-looking, willing to stand on its own feet, and is capable of setting its own course to ensure the longevity of the independent U.S. cattle producer. Now that the plan is in place, there's one huge challenge to actually implementing the plan. That's because the success of the plan will be determined by whether or not the hundreds of thousands of independent U.S. cattle producers will support it. And we're hoping that every U.S. cattle producer will take this plan to their respective U.S. representative and their U.S. senators to tell them that this should be the new direction for the U.S. cattle industry. If the new Congress and the new administration are looking for a new strategy to strengthen the domestic food supply chain while simultaneously revitalizing rural America, then that new strategy is right here in the new cattle industry long-range plan. So please join us on Facebook Live on Wednesday, January 13th at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time to learn more about how the new cattle industry long-range plan can benefit you, your operation, your community, and the future of the independent U.S. cattle producer. And you can go to our website at r-calfusa.com to join with us so we are strong enough to direct your cattle industry towards a more profitable and prosperous future for the next generations. With that, thank you and goodbye.